We'll convert an Angular single page application to a server-side rendered application using Angular Universal and deploy the application on Netlify. If this sounds interesting to you, please keep watching. Hello everyone, welcome to Full Stack JavaScript channel. Before we start on the server-side rendering, let's first see the existing application. We created a to-do application with Firebase authentication and store the data on Firebase. We can add, delete and even filter the to-dos. There is a clear completed option. We could even change the theme. If you want to see this application being built from the scratch, you can click on the description. Now if you look at the page source, the only component which is rendered is the app root. The remaining structure we are seeing, it's all created using the JavaScript finally. So if you look at so it's not rendered from the server side. So what is the benefit of server side rendering? We'll come into the details part of that. In case of Angular single page application, locally when we do ng-serve, it's starting a Node.js server using Webpack and loading the files on browser. But for production, we do ng-build and it will generate the static files like HTML, CSS, JavaScript and assets files. These static files are returned by hosting providers when requested from browser. There is no Node.js server required on the hosting. In case of a single page application, users will first see the initial layout and the loading animation maybe. After that, the client-side JavaScript will query the data and only after that the real data will be populated. This will give the user an impression of a slow website. In case of server-side rendering, there is always a separate Node.js server is running. And the Node.js server is the one which is responsible for rendering the page. So what will happen is that server will generate the HTML dynamically from the server side and it will return that HTML including the data to the browser. So with that way, in a single call, browser will be getting the full rendered page. So the user will get an impression that the page is faster and it will also improve on the SEO. If you follow the Angular documentation, they're providing a schematics for adding the Angular Universal to the existing Angular application. So we'll run the same command. This will basically what it will do is it will create a new module for the server and a server.ts will be created, which is basically creating by default using the Express. It's a web framework for Node.js. And then there are other initialization files and TypeScript configurations. All those things are there. So it's got added. The changes are added. Now you can see in the server, it is actually initializing a Express server and then every static files are returning just from the public folder random. Now if you look at the server module, which is loading up the app module itself, and it's adding the server module from the Angular platform server. Now in app module, we are using, now it's not just browser module with the server transition. This is useful for passing some data from server to the client if you want to reuse the data. Similar way for router module also there is an extra property being added so that the server is able to know how to render this from the server side. Now we will start this application. Instead of ng-serve we have npm run dev SSR is there. I have started that application. If you look at the page source now, it is not just the app root element anymore. There are a lot of other elements being rendered. So that means server side rendering is working. But there is one issue here. It's actually not rendering the home page. Even though we open the home page, it's actually rendering the login page. So there is some issue with that, how we have set up, so that we still have to see. Now if you look at the console error, there is an error on SessionStorage is not defined. So in browser, SessionStorage and local storage will work, but in server these APIs are not available. So we cannot use these APIs. One thing what we can do is we'll just check whether if it is a server or not. then if it is a server, then don't use that. So to check that, there are from the platform server we can actually check if it is a platform, if it's a server or is it a browser or not. So we need to inject a special provider, which is a platform ID. And then we can utilize is platform server. And we need to pass the platform ID. So we'll assign this to a boolean flag property so that this is available throughout the class. Now we'll check if it is server, then we'll just simply return theme as light. This is a temporary solution, but we have to fix it correctly. Now another problem, icon is not loading. In our app component, we are loading the icon using the URL. Now in server-side rendering, the relative paths won't work. So we need to give an absolute path. So we'll do one thing, we'll create in the environment, we'll pass a base URL so that we can change the URL for production and dev. Now we will pass this as a base URL for all the icon URLs we are adding, so that it won't be a relative URL, instead it is always an absolute URL we are trying to load. Now I changed it. Now if we run it again, now that error is not there. Since we want the data to be available in both server and client side, we need to use cookie. So we'll install a package which will make it easy to deal with the cookies. So this will provide us a cookie service option. Now we need to change a little bit more in the server.ts. We need to pass that request. So we'll just follow the documentation as it is. So here what is happening is, from the Express server is passing that to the Angular engine, so that the whatever cookie available in the request is available to the Angular server also. Now in our auth service, whenever we get the user, we can store it in the cookie so that it is available in server as well. So the cookie service has two options. One is without the server-side rendering. Since in our case we used server-side rendering, the package name is a bit different. It is NGX cookie SSR. And what we need to get is also SSR cookie service. We will inject that as well. Now we can set the data, get the data, all these things we can do same way how we did the session storage. We need to pass some key and then we can get the value. Now on the initialize, we are just trying to set some data. Now we can see whether it is setting the data or not in the cookie. Now if you look at the document cookie, you can see that the data is available now. So that means we are able to set the data. Now we will utilize the same for setting the user information. So that way even server also has the access to whether the user is logged in or not. So we'll have this data only if the user is logged in. So whenever the user is available, we will convert it into a string and set that to the cookie. It should be a stringify actually to convert to string. So if user is available, we are setting the data. If not, we'll remove from the cookie if something is already there. That means on sign off scenario, this will be useful. Now we'll try to log in. Now if we look at the cookie again, we can see that there is a user cookie available. So we can now utilize this for our authentication check on server. What's happening on server side is server will try to get the user details. If the user details are not there, it will try to redirect to the login page. Now the server side check, we need to add a custom one. By default, the Angular Fire is not supporting the SSR one. So what we'll do is we'll create our own custom Auth Guard. We'll just have a can activate one. In the can activate, we will read from the cookie and then we will check whether if user is there, then we will allow. So as a first step, what we will do is in our auth service, as soon as a page is loaded, so or as soon as it is initialized, we want to initialize the value from the cookie. We want to get the data, initial data from the cookie. So we'll create a method which will read from the cookie. If it is there, then it will set that as the value rather than initializing with a null. So we'll create a new method. So we just have to read from the cookie service, same like how we did earlier from the SessionStorage, how we read. Same way, if the data is there, we'll be getting a string value of the user. We just have to parse the data and set that to the current user behavior subject. If the user is not there, we'll just return null. Now this will become the initial value for our behavior subject. Now that that initial setup is done, we can actually check whether now all the other setup is already there. We are setting the data. Now in our Auth Guard, we can just inject the auth service, and from the auth service we can listen for the auth dollar, which is the subject, sorry, user dollar, which is subject. And if it has a value, then we will just return true. Otherwise, we will return false. So if you return true, that means that route is allowed to continue. If you return false, you cannot enter that. So we'll just do so we need to finally return a Boolean value. So we will pipe that and use the map operator to return a true or false. So we just have to check whether the user has a value or not. If it is there, then just return true. Same way, we can also do one more thing. Like if the user is not available, we can just redirect to the login page. So for that, we can just use a tap operator, so which won't make any difference to the response. So it is just for any side effect we want to do. So in this case, what we want to do is, if the user is not there, redirect to the login page. So for that, we will inject the router. Now we can say this router dot navigate by URL or navigate. I will just fix the type a little bit. I am returning. Now in our app router, we will, instead of the router Auth Guard provided by the Angular Fire, we'll use our custom Auth Guard. Now if we'll try to refresh the page, this should come from the backend. Now but it is getting stuck because I think the server is still not able to render the data correctly. It is not able to call the Firebase correctly. But it is able to get the user details. We can see that by looking at the page source. Earlier when we look at the page source, we were getting the login page, because from the server side it was getting redirected to the home page, login page. Now if we look at the page source, we are actually rendering the home page itself. So that means the server side rendering is working. The only issue is it is not rendering with the data. Issue what is happening is the server is calling the data and getting the data, and the same thing when it comes to the client also tries to call that, and this causes a conflict, and that's why it is not rendering properly. So we already have a transfer state server transition is available. So we will utilize that so that whatever server has already called, we'll pass that to the client, and then client can just read that data instead of calling the server again. So we'll inject the transfer state. So in this one transfer state, we need a key. We need a key to store the value, and we can store any type of value. So we'll create a key with what is the type of data we are going to store and what is the name of the key, so that we can set the value and we can retrieve the value with that key. In our case, we are going to store a list of to do. So the type is to do array, and we can give the name as to do's or something. So this will be the key name, and now we need to read. So the client has to read first. If the data is already there, then just take from there rather than making a call. So we are making this an observable value changes so that we can add an operator. So we are using start with operator. So what we are telling here is this observable initialize with an transition value. So if it is that data is there, it will take that data automatically rather than making the Firestore query. We will also set the value whenever the query happens. Whenever the data is not there, the query happens. We need to set the value also, so that when we set this data, then only we can read the data also next time when the page is loading. So the client will get this one. So this call can happen either in server side or in the client side. Whenever this is initialized, it will set the data and then it will start the query with that value. Now we'll check whether it is working or not. Now if we look at the page source, so we have a start learning React is there, and we can see that that is getting rendered. So that means our server side rendering is working with the even the data. We can use cloud functions to start a Node.js server and which will render the application. But if you look at the Firebase, it is not free anymore. So we need to look at an alternative. So I looked into another option. There are a lot of options, Netlify, Vercel, all these things are there, which provides some free tier. So I'm trying with the Netlify now. In Netlify, we can create a new site and we can create functions also. First, we'll just deploy our application in Netlify. So I'll create a repository so that Netlify automatically set up the continuous integration and deployment. We'll push these changes to the repository. We can now import our repository to the Netlify. So we'll import from an existing project in the add new site, and from there we can integrate with the GitHub or GitLab. All these options are there. So I've integrated with my GitHub account, and from there we can select the repo and the branch. Now we can define what is the commands to run, which folder will be finally the published directory. That is the one which will be hosted on the page. Now the deployment has started. Now if we look into the deployment logs, you can see that the deployment has started. It will try to do the npm installation, and then it will do the npm build, and finally it will deploy the changes to the site. There are errors. That is because base URL is not added in our environment prod file. We added only for our local development. So we'll use Netlify site URL as the base URL for our prod file. Now a new deployment has triggered. We'll just run the npm run build in our local also to see how the dist folder looks like. For a universal application, the dist folder looks a bit different. So in this case, it's showing site is live. Let's look at the page. So site is still not loading. So this seems to be some issue with the deployment settings. If you look into the deploy setting, and we already have given the dist slash then the project name, but in case of Angular Universal, it is actually one more level. It is dist slash project name slash browser. So we need to change that also. Now we'll trigger the deployment again. Now the application is loading. But if you look at the page source, now what you are seeing is actually the page not found page. Why that is happening? Because it's a login URL is /login. /login, if you hit directly to the server doesn't know what to render. For a single page application, every page should redirect back to the home page. So whatever is the page, whatever is the URL we are hitting, it should all render back to the industrial system. Then only the Angular can load every time and then render the page. So to add the configuration, there are two ways: either netlify.toml file we can add, or a redirects file we can add. In this case, we will just use the Netlify configuration file. Thing is, every URL redirect back to the home page. So we'll say /*, so every URL render the index.html. We can even use this for proxying to the another service and all, and we'll change later to use our functions, which is rendering the Node.js application and all. First we'll try with the single page application setup, then we will create the function. So there are a lot of redirect or proxying options are available. Now if we look at the page source, it is still a single page application. We can see only app root component. Functions or serverless function is for simple purposes. We can just trigger a particular one functionality rather than creating a full-fledged application. So in case of Netlify, we'll just create under Netlify folder a function start. So I'm using a package serverless HTTP to convert existing Express application to a serverless mode. So this app we are getting it from the server, Angular server main. Now I try to use the Angular universal plugin is there, which will automatically take care of adding this server functionality. It's a beta version, so I tried with the different options, but that didn't really work out. So to do that, you can just say whatever is a function, and then you can add the plugin, and we can give the build command. I ended up doing like this. I created a Node.js file to copy the dist folder from the root to inside the Netlify function folder, because Netlify is not able to access the files outside of the functions folder. That is one step. Second thing is, every request should be redirected back to the function, because now the Netlify function or the cloud function is the one which is handling of rendering the page. So we need to change our redirect in such a way that all the pages will point to the Netlify /function/start. Start is my function name. Also I added the build command as we'll first do the build, and then we'll do the copy file. So copy files is a script, whatever script we created just now, that I added into the scripts property, and then which will copy the dist folder to the Netlify function. Go to the direct function page. It will give a page not found. That is because there is no route defined for function/start. So what I did is we created a component, page not found component, and added to the path ***. So that means any URL which is not matching will render the page not found one. But if you go to the home page, since we added the redirect rule, it should display the page correctly. And it is displaying. Now we can refresh and see whether it is doing the server-side rendering. It is working fine because we can see that all the elements are being rendered. So server-side functionality is working in Netlify. In our existing application, we have the Firebase workflows, which will do the deploy, and also it will do the preview URL on peer pull request. Now we will change that to the Netlify as we are deploying to Netlify. Now Netlify has also GitHub Actions available, not from the official, but there are a lot of other actions available in the marketplace. So first two steps, which is checkout and installation and build, we still need, but the build will change a little bit to build the SSR one, so that we can make sure that our build will not fail when doing an SSR build. Now the last step is the Firebase one that we will change. So this will replace with the Netlify one. So I looked into the marketplace. There are a lot of Netlify actions available. One with the higher stars I just took, which is Netlify actions. How do we add that? It's a very simple process. We just have to say users. You can add name also, it's an optional one. Now this action requires a list of configurations. So we'll just copy that values. So it should take from the netlify.tml file. I think we are repeating here. Maybe we can try both. We'll see this one and then we'll also ask to take it from the config file. So we need to create a GitHub token is automatically there. Pull request command we need. So this is because this workflow we are running when pull request is created. Now we need to add some environment variable also, so that you will get access to the Netlify. So for creating the auth token, we'll go to the Netlify account. Here we can create a new access token. We'll give some similar name maybe. Now this will copy and put it in our GitHub secrets. Then only we'll be able to access that in the actions. So we have to go to our repository. In the settings, we can add the secrets. So here we can add the secret. So we need to give a name and a value. So name is the Netlify token. Now we need to add one more secret, which is the site ID. Now how do we get the site ID? We go to the site settings, site details. So we'll go to the Netlify dashboard and we are in site settings. In site setting there is a site ID. So we need to copy that. And now we'll create the next one. Now both the secrets are there. Now this should work. Push to the GitHub Actions and all. Now we'll try to create a PR and see whether this action is working or not. So we'll make a small change and we'll create a PR. From the master branch, I'll create a new feature / page not found branch. And now from that, we'll create a pull request. Now when I create a pull request, the check will initialize automatically. We haven't added the branch protection, otherwise it wouldn't have even allowed to merge. Now you can see that the action has already started. And even we can see the logs. Once action is completed, action run is completed. Now if you look at the pull request, we can see a preview URL. And now that it's also showing the check is completed successfully. Now if you look at here, it is a different URL. It's only for previewing the changes, you can see.